Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited today as I have a special guest on the show. Noelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Kate.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show today because we're going to be chatting about autoimmune conditions, which we've touched a little bit on the podcast, but we haven't really dived into. So before we do get into that, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Well, my name's Noelle, and I am a human being who has been on this lovely planet for 45 years, which at times feels like a short time and other times feels like a long time. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona with my husband of 10 years, and we have five crazy dogs and three adorable bunnies. So our house is very full. I'm also a stepmother to two amazing young adults, and I'm a health and wellness fitness enthusiast. I absolutely love movement, so I'm really excited to be here on your podcast, Kate. Movement is just such a huge priority for me, especially I think for my mind. Currently in this season of life, I'm loving weightlifting and yoga and lots of walking and hiking and just really staying active all day. But listening to my body, when it's time to slow down and rest. And lastly, I am an autoimmune thriver, which really was the catalyst for my newest adventure, which is BrightlyThrive. So I am the co-founder of BrightlyThrive, the Autoimmunity Community, and we are an app and a platform exclusively for those navigating the oftentimes wild roller coaster of having an autoimmune condition or a health challenge. BrightlyThrive is a space where members can connect with each other. They can connect with our team of health and wellness experts. They can share their stories and their experiences, but most of all, they can learn new ways and new strategies to help them overcome their autoimmune condition and help to put their body back into a state of ease. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
And now I know yourself, you've had your own, journey with an autoimmune condition. Can you share a little bit more about that with listeners? Because I know that's obviously, a big part of the reason why you've created your community platform.
That's right. Yes. So I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called granulomatosis with polyangiitis. It's a rare autoimmune disease. It's a mouthful. So we abbreviate it as GPA for short, but essentially it is a vasculitis disease. And what vasculitis is it's inflammation of the small blood vessels. So I was experiencing symptoms back in 2018, leading a very busy, active life, running my own business, doing all the things, and started to experience a lot of symptoms just sort of out of the blue that progressively got worse. I had a lot of sinus issues. I lost my hearing. I was having, night sweats and fatigue, a lot of really unsexy symptoms and things that, aren't fun to talk about. Until one day I woke up and I completely lost my equilibrium. I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand. Went to the ER, was admitted to the hospital, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And that kind of led me on a search of visiting multiple doctors to figure out what was actually wrong. And turns out, I was diagnosed with this autoimmune condition. Back then, I had no idea what autoimmune even was, let alone what vasculitis was. And that really was the reason why I jumped into health and wellness. I wanted to figure out, why my body was in this state of disease. And, no doctor could really tell me. They just, said, here's this medication, this is what life looks like. You're always going to have this. It's not something that's curable. And it was very overwhelming, very scary, very frustrating, definitely isolating, very lonely, because on the outside I looked normal, but I was experiencing all of these really debilitating symptoms. And so, I just dove into the research, went back to school, got board certified in health and wellness. And that was really the moment that really kind of ignited my path into health and wellness. And, I'm happy to say that I'm healthy today. I'm off all medication, but it's been a journey to get to where I am today.
Well, that's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I'm sure there's many listeners listening in that may have an autoimmune condition themselves and have been through, similar journeys with trying to find a diagnosis and struggling through, at points in time. But can you clarify, just for everyone that may be listening and not quite sure what an autoimmune condition is, can you explain what it actually is?
Yes, I'm really glad that you asked this question, because like I said, back in 2018, I had no clue what autoimmune was. So, you hear things like, if we were on this show talking about cancer, most people know what cancer is. Autoimmunity is like, it's much more confusing. It's complicated. I think a lot of times too, it's even a bit mysterious. Most people have probably heard of things like type 1 diabetes or celiac disease or multiple sclerosis. So these are all autoimmune conditions, and autoimmune is really that umbrella term that's used to classify, all of these conditions. And there happens to be over 100 different types of autoimmune conditions. And the sad news is that things are not slowing down, Kate. The rates are skyrocketing. Just in the last 50 years, autoimmune diagnoses have increased over 400%. So, in a nutshell, autoimmunity is when the body starts to, the immune system, which we know is meant to protect us, it's when the immune system mistakenly starts to attack healthy tissue, healthy cells in the body, and it can really affect any part of the body, any organ, any system, you name it. And that is why we have over, 100 different types of autoimmune conditions. They all affect different parts of the body and manifest into, symptoms that can really affect anything.
And with the skyrocketing rates, because I had heard that, there had been quite a massive increase, do they know why there has been a massive increase? Is some of the reason, we can diagnose things better than we used to? Or is there more of that sort of diet and lifestyle piece that is contributing to the higher sort of prevalence of autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think the answer is complicated. I think it's both. I think it's a multitude of many different reasons. How a person even develops an autoimmune in the first place is, it's complicated. It's not very straightforward as to, what is the root cause of autoimmunity. We do know, based off of a lot of research, that there's sort of this perfect storm, if you will, that happens. And we do know that genetics, play a role, but only about 23%. So there was a twin study done by Stanford back in, I believe it was 2015, and they looked at different genetic and lifestyle factors, and they determined that the immune system was largely influenced by environmental and lifestyle factors, 77%, which is really huge. And so the second thing we know is that a person with autoimmune is going to have an increased intestinal permeability, which is also known as, leaky gut. We hear that term a lot. Now is becoming, much more mainstream. Doctors are recognizing it. And basically leaky gut, for listeners out there who may not have familiarized themselves with it, is when the small intestine lining becomes damaged in the stomach and food particles, toxins, bacteria leaks through that intestinal wall into the bloodstream. And then causes that immune, reaction. And then, the third thing we know is that there's a trigger, and those triggers can be, this is where it gets complicated. This is where you become sort of that detective. It sends you on that path of detective work, and it's never just one thing, right? And triggers can be all over the board, from, as you mentioned, poor poor diet, like, a lack of good nutrition, hormonal shifts like pregnancy, environmental triggers like mold or toxicity, chemicals, even emotional trauma can be a big, huge trigger. And there was actually a study recently too that talked about, over 80% of those diagnosed with autoimmune have reported a big emotional stressor right before the onset of their autoimmune disease. So we know that, emotions play a big role as well. So you can see why, autoimmunity, it's messy, it's complicated, it's frustrating to say the least, and it really requires a lot of patience, a lot of detective work to uncover these things, and it's really difficult to do it alone. And I think that this is where working with a solid team of practitioners, health professionals, coaches, people like yourself, Kate, having that community is so beneficial.
Well, I know even in the studio, because I obviously have quite a number of people that come in and do Pilates with me who have autoimmune conditions. And it is something we need to be aware of, because some days they'll have a lot of energy, and they'll feel fantastic and, want to really work harder. And then other days they will come in and they will feel really tight. They might feel a little bit down, anxious, not have as much energy. And so we do really adjust their sessions depending on how they're feeling, because it changes all the time.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And, symptoms they could, like I said, they can be all over the board, because it can affect so many parts of the body, so many, things that people experience. I think a lot of times too, as women, we sort of brush it off. We're not paying attention to these symptoms, or we're chalking it up to, maybe old age or our hormones or this or that. And, it's really important to kind of slow down and realize that those symptoms are messages. They're a message to you that something is off, that something isn't right.
And I think we can be very good at ignoring a lot of those messages, because we're busy and we are looking after other people, and we think, having to get the work done, and that is more important than trying to go to bed a little bit earlier or get our movement in for the day, because we always think we've got more time for that. We can fit that in at some other stage. It's not so essential to do it right now.
Right.
Now, when it comes to sort of, I guess, either supporting our health prior, to help prevent potentially getting an autoimmune condition, or maybe somebody is listening in who has an autoimmune condition, what are some of the lifestyle habits that we can do to really support our health?
Well, I think first is food. I think food is, it plays a significant role. I think not just in, someone who's diagnosed with autoimmune, or, who's got that official diagnosis, but just in being a human being in general. We talk a lot about food. I know you do too as well, Kate. Food is medicine. Nutrition is so powerful. And I think that if people would just start to make those dietary shifts, that they could see some massive improvements in their well-being, in their symptoms, in their energy, in how they feel. And then, of course, layering in all of the other sort of lifestyle medicine approaches, things like sleep optimization, gut health repair, stress management, movement, exercise. And suddenly, when you start to layer those things in, now you're working with your body, and your body is just naturally going to start to work for you. Like, our bodies are these self-healing machines. And I think that people don't realize the power that they have in their own hands.
And I know a few of my clients that have been diagnosed with, say, thyroid conditions and things, and been told themselves that they'll be on medication forever. They've worked really hard to dial in their movement and change their diet and lower their stress levels. And they actually have been able to reduce or even come off a lot of the medications they were put on too. So, not to say anybody listening in, that it's, a possibility for everybody, because obviously depends on your, condition and, everything that comes with that. But it is, I think a lot of people get told you'll be on medication for life. And sometimes it is a possibility, if we can dial in some of these things, that we may be able to come off it.
That's right. Yeah. And that's exactly what, our big purpose at Brightly Thrive is to reimagine autoimmunity, really try to transform the way that you think about this autoimmune condition or these symptoms that you're experiencing. If you have an autoimmune diagnosis, you know, it doesn't have to be this doom and gloom, life sentence or label or, this thing that is going to consume your entire life. You can really use it as that catalyst to start to make those changes in your life. You can be angry about it. You can be sad about it, frustrated, because I have been there too, but you do not have to accept it. And, like I said, we don't view autoimmunity as the problem. We actually view it as the solution. It's that solution towards living a life that is built on healthy habits, lasting change. There's a great quote that I came across recently. And it said, being sick is not our fault, right? But if you want to get better, it has to be our responsibility. And it's so true.
Yeah, 100% agree, because sometimes it is out of your control, the things that happen, but you've got to take some of those, initiatives and steps to make changes if you want to see things change in the long run.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes, people listen in, and I've been, people have said to me before, this all sounds great. This advice sounds great, but I'm a busy single mom. I've got kids. I've got to work full time. I've got this autoimmune condition and I don't have any energy. And I'm a bit, like, where do I start? What should I focus on first if I really want to start to make a change?
Right. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think that for most people intuitively know where their unhealthy habits are, where they need to address things, right? For example, I think, somebody who's smoking, they know they need to quit smoking, right? Somebody who's overindulging in, a lot of sugar, they know they probably need to cut back on that sugar, right? Or maybe someone who doesn't have an exercise or a movement routine, and it's been years since they've had a movement routine, they know that that's probably a good place to start as well. So I think, whatever it is, we know breaking those habits, or I guess shifting those habits into healthier habits, it's super hard for people. And we're wired as a society to have things quick and to have things fast. And when it comes to health, when it comes to overcoming autoimmune, you really have to be willing to play the long game. People look at me today and they say, well, you're so healthy, you've achieved this health. And it's like, I'm still achieving health. Like, there's still things that I'm working on. There's still things I'm discovering. There's still strategies that I'm experimenting with and trying. So it's never just this one and done thing. It's truly a lifestyle, and living a healthy life is really the best way to prevent any type of disease, to prevent any type of autoimmune or any kind of health issue for yourself, in the future and into old age. And if you're struggling and you're listening to this and you need help getting started or kind of identifying where those unhealthy habits lie, I would say ask for help, reach out to someone to help you, reach out to, find a community like Brightly Thrive, work with a practitioner to sort of, take a good audit of your life and see where we can start to make those small shifts. For me personally, I'm sort of a quick start mentality. I'm kind of an all-in person. So when I was diagnosed back in 2018, I was like learning, all these different things. And I was just like applying everything. I was cutting sugar, cutting alcohol, cutting gluten. And I realized and I recognized that not everyone has that type of mindset or personality, right? And so our members, they get tons of help from our Thrive Guides. These are our health and wellness experts, and they help people make those gradual shifts. And those gradual shifts, they may seem small in the beginning. Maybe it's just, you're starting to increase your water intake. Maybe you're starting to pay attention to the time you go to bed at night. Those gradual little changes are going to add up to this big picture. It's going to build momentum, and it's going to really, sort of catapult you forward into that path of, now I'm taking on this whole new identity as a person who is living this health and wellness lifestyle, I'm taking care of my health. And it is, once you unlock that path, it's your whole life begins to change, truly.
Mm. And I think, you mentioned getting that support, and that can definitely, really, I think, catapult how quickly you can make changes too and see those results change. But if you are maybe thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to, start that sort of, delving into communities and things or reaching for help, just going back to some of those, basic habits, like you said, going to bed a bit earlier, cutting back on sugar, the basics, as you said before, they're not super sexy. No one wants to talk about them, but they really do work.
They do, yes.
Now, when it comes to movement, is there some things that you recommend, if you have an autoimmune condition, that you should be a little bit wary of, whether or not it's, maybe looking at if you're used to doing high intensity exercise, maybe that's not super great for you. Is there anything that you tend to recommend to your members?
Yes, we just had a phenomenal guest speaker in our community just a few weeks ago, and she's a movement expert as well. And she was talking about the different ways that we can move our bodies, different functional movements, like everyday things that we might not consider. Taking the stairs, or parking further away from the front of a store so you get some extra steps in. So all of these, things, those little movements definitely add up. But I think that movement with autoimmune, it's so individual, right? Because of where a person is at in their journey, and what are their symptoms looking like, how much energy are they having each day, because we know fatigue is such a huge it's kind of the flagship symptom of autoimmune. So a lot of people who suffer with autoimmune experience that fatigue. And so that can be challenging, but back when I was first diagnosed in 2018, for me, I gravitated towards yoga because, number one, I knew that I needed something to help me manage my stress and help me alleviate a lot of anxiety that I was experiencing just from being diagnosed with autoimmune and having those fears of, what is life going to look like for me now? And yoga was something that I, had never tried in my life. And I remember Googling, closest yoga studio to where I lived. I found one. I drove over there the next day. I walked in and I signed up. Again, I'm an all in type of person, right? And I was hooked. It was such a great feeling to be able to move my body in different ways that I've not done before. And at the same time, finding my breath, finding that calmness and that peace to ease my anxiety. And I tell you what, Kate, I'm still a yogi. I'll be a yogi for life. I actually became, a registered yoga teacher through COVID. And it's just, it's kind of my go-to. But, that was 6 years ago. And where I'm at today, I just picked up weightlifting last year. And so I'm able to incorporate, some kind of more intense type of movement and exercise. But again, it took me a while to get there, right? Because of where my body was, where I was at health-wise, and even just mentally. I think that our emotions come into play when it comes to movement as well. Like, we have to have that mindset of, this is what feels good to me. This is where I'm at. I know my capabilities. I know my limits. And, it's going to ebb and flow. You're going to enter in different seasons throughout your journey.
Well, I love a few things that you mentioned there is one, picking a movement that you enjoy so that you feel more motivated to sort of lean into it. And then number two, resistance training in general, because we know as we age how important building up that muscle mass, that bone mass is, especially for women, to help prevent osteopenia and osteoporosis and help our basal metabolic rate and, everything that goes with that. So, but as you said, if you are in those sort of maybe early stages of diagnosis and you have no energy, the last thing you're going to feel like doing is going to lift some heavy weights that feel really hard to do and taxing on the body potentially as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, if there are, listeners that are listening in and, maybe they have just been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and you could give them, some advice of just where to start with this, sort of potentially, life-changing diagnosis for them, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I have a lot of advice. I think the first thing I would say to someone who may be newly diagnosed is that, first of all, understand that overcoming autoimmune and getting the body back to a state of complete and total health, it takes a multifaceted approach. It's not just one singular thing, and it's both internal and it's both external. There's no magic formula. There's no magic solution for solving an autoimmune puzzle. And it really is an autoimmune puzzle. Every person is unique. Every person is different, but I will say that it can be done. I'm living proof of that. And, my co-founder of BrightlyThrive, she's living proof of that. Our team of Thrive Guides, our health and wellness experts, our practitioners, they've all experienced their own autoimmune journey and they're living proof of that. Again, the body is a self-healing machine as long as we're treating it right. Secondly, I think that I would say it's really important to distinguish yourself from your illness. And you can be aware of the symptoms you're experiencing. You can be aware of the aches and the pains and the hurts and the emotions even. But I would say to not allow them to become part of you. So for example, because it might be a little abstract, right? But for example, you can say to yourself, okay, I know that there's this sickness here, but I'm not sick, right? It's sort of like this mind brain hack that eliminates this fixed identity that I'm a sick person. You're not identifying with the disease because you intuitively know that it's your birthright to feel good and that these symptoms that you're experiencing, they are just temporary. Your autoimmune, my autoimmune, it can teach me. It has taught me. It's taught me so many things, but it definitely doesn't define us, right? And our Thrive Guide, Desiree, she's one of our experts on our team. She helps our members with this a lot. She's kind of our mindset guru, mindset coach. We call her the Des frame of mind because she's all about mindset. She really helps people with that. And let's see, lastly, I would say to not underestimate the power of community and connection. We know that we are social creatures. It's in our DNA. This is how we've evolved. This is how community has kept us safe. Autoimmune is lonely. It's isolating. Just take a look at all of the different types of autoimmune names. They tell you nothing about what that person is experiencing, right? And if you're someone who has autoimmune and you're trying to explain that to someone else, suddenly you're teaching like a biology lesson, right? And this person is standing there with a glazed over look. People just don't understand what you're going through. And so oftentimes it's an invisible disease. You look completely normal on the outside, but like you're suffering big time on the inside. So people with autoimmune, you need to find your tribe. You need to be validated and understood and supported in, I think, massive ways. And I think that society really does a poor job at doing that. We're so supportive of people with cancer. We have, walks for cancer. We have all sorts of, support mechanisms in place for people with cancer. And I'm super happy about that. Like I've had people in my life who've had cancer and been touched by cancer. So I'm so grateful for that. But I think that there's so much more that we can do for those suffering with autoimmune. And that is exactly what BrightlyThrive was created to do. It's to, provide you with those like-minded individuals who are saying, you know what? I have this diagnosis. I'm dealing with these things, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to learn these strategies. I'm going to start to make these shifts in my life. I want those quality people around me, those like-minded people around me to hold me accountable, to lift me up, to cheer me on, to, walk that path with me and to really celebrate me. I know that this autoimmune diagnosis, it's not this doom and gloom thing. I'm going to use it to make those shifts in my life, and I'm going to thrive in ways that I've never thrived before.
Mm. And I think, making those points about connection and community, having the option to be online is amazing because it's such an amazing resource. You can connect with people from around the world, you can connect with experts around the world, and the information can all be in one place. So you're not having to, drive 40 minutes to do a meetup here and then drive 50 minutes to have an appointment here. So I think we're very lucky in this day and age. I think after the last couple of years, a lot of things moved online, but I think there's some huge benefits from having these communities online as well.
I totally agree, Kate. And, technology and even, social media, things like that, it kind of is this double-edged sword. You want to be intentional about it. You want to make sure that you're connecting with the right types of people online, because trust me, I've been in online communities. I've been in virtual spaces, especially back when I was first diagnosed. And there's a lot of, not so great virtual communities out there that exist. There's a lot of negativity, a lot of that doom and gloom, just a really kind of that victim mindset. And I would say that, BrightlyThrive is kind of the antithesis of that. It is that like fresh breath of air where you're like, oh, okay, this feels good. This feels like a place where I belong.
Mm. And, we've talked a lot about autoimmune conditions, but is there anything that we maybe haven't covered that you'd really like to talk about?
Oh gosh, I could talk about autoimmune forever. I think that, I like to say that I am sort of the expert on autoimmune, not because of, my credentials that I've accumulated, but just because I've lived it, right? It's this life-tested of wisdom of going through the struggle myself. But I would just say this: if you're out there and you're listening and you're struggling, first of all, I feel you. I understand. I'm sorry. I know that it sucks. And it is going to get better. This is temporary. It does not have to be forever. And also, if you're out there and you're having symptoms and maybe you're like searching for answers, maybe you haven't found that diagnosis yet, I would say you don't have to wait to have a diagnosis or to have all the answers before you start to make those shifts to support your own body's healing mechanism. There is no medication, there is no doctor, no treatment, no test that is going to do what you alone can do to support your body. And I think that if you need help in the process, again, communities like BrightlyThrive, practitioners, health and wellness experts, people are out there to kind of help guide you and be that guide on the side and help you walk that path. It is truly something that I wish that I had leaned more into back in 2018 when I was first diagnosed. I think that, having that community, having that space, having a team of experts to help me to kind of help me uncover some answers, that would have been very beneficial for me. And so it's exactly why, BrightlyThrive exists today.
Mm. Well, that's all fantastic advice. And I think the only thing that I'd like to touch on before we finish is that from what I know about autoimmunity, it is more highly prevalent in women. So, thyroid conditions and MS, there is a higher incidence in women than men. Do you know any reasons behind that might be the case?
Yes, they say that over 80% of people diagnosed with autoimmune are women. And research is kind of all over the place, but a lot of times we hear that it's due to, the different hormonal factors at play of, versus a man and a woman. And certain conditions too can be more prevalent in women than others. And for me, you know, my vasculitis, it's kind of a split. It's kind of a split between, you know, 50-50 men and women. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I hope, you know, they do more research around it, but I know from, say, you know, the clients that I've worked with over the years, it's probably been women, I would say sort of mid 40s to sort of that 60, you know, age group, sort of 45 to 60, that get diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And there's usually, as you were saying before, been some type of trigger, trauma, stressful event, you know, that's been layered on to, you know, everything that's going on in their lives. So I think it would be, you know, a very interesting area of research for them to continue to dive into.
Yes, I totally agree.
Now, I always finish off by asking my guests that if there's one piece of health advice that you could give that our listeners could go off and instigate straight away after listening to this podcast, what would it be?
Oh, one piece of advice. That's really hard, Kate. I would say that, you know, as a human being, you're meant to feel vibrant, you're meant to feel alive, you're meant to feel energized during your time here on Earth. And if you're having symptoms, don't brush them off as normal. Stay curious about your body, not just the physical, but the emotional side of things. So I think if there was one piece of advice, I would say, you know, we talked a lot about nutrition and movement, stress, and those types of things. I would say to not ignore the emotional side of things. Trauma and overwhelming life experiences can absolutely be that, you know, switch that gets flipped. It can be that trigger that turns your body against you, unfortunately. And, you know, the body truly does keep score. In fact, there was a recent book that was just published, and it's called The Autoimmune Cure. And it talks about this. And there's tons of research in this book. So I would say if that's, you know, piques your interest, take a look at this book. It's called The Autoimmune Cure. I can't remember the author. I apologize, but it talks about the connection with emotional trauma and an autoimmune disease. And like you said, Kate, with women, you know, I think that we go our whole life, and it's, you know, autoimmune is like it's kind of this thing that's in the background, and it's going to manifest. It's going to show symptoms. And then all of a sudden, it's like you've got some major things going on. And so I would say, yeah, don't ignore those symptoms, and look into the emotional side of things as well. It's been a big game changer for me as well, especially within the last couple of years.
Well, that's some fantastic advice, and I'll be sure we'll look up the book and link it up in the show notes so listeners can definitely head there if they want to check that out. But where can listeners reach out, connect with you and the community and learn more?
Sure. Well, they can visit our website at brightlythrive.com. We have a phenomenal ebook, and I know a lot of people have ebooks out there, but our ebook is so fantastic. It's 41 pages long. It's just so valuable. I keep telling my team we need to charge for this ebook, but it is free. So anyone listening should, you know, head to the website, go get that ebook. It's called The Autoimmune Healing Paradigm. Lots of information in there, lots of different strategies that you can take a look at. We also have a fun quiz on our website, and just tons of great educational articles on our blog, really fantastic stuff. You can also follow us. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And you can find us by searching Brightly Thrive.
Amazing. Well, we'll link that all up in the show notes too. So again, listeners, you can head there and check out all those links as you need. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Noelle. You've shared a wealth of information. And as you were sort of saying before, this is one of those areas where it can be hard to kind of sift through all the information that's out there. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Kate. This was a great experience. I appreciate it.